Shalom. So as we begin the beginning of the year, Tuesday night, March the 21st, begins the new year, the biblical new year. So Happy New Year. Yay, we made it. So Tuesday night, when the sun goes down, will be Abib first. And you say, well, Gina, why are you celebrating the new year after the sun goes down? Why not 12 o'clock midnight on Tuesday? Well, because 12 o'clock midnight is the middle of the night. It's not the beginning of a day. So just like in Genesis, when Jesus described the days and the nights, let's go to Genesis chapter 1. It says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, and it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. And so in verse number 5, part B, it says the evening and the morning were the first day. Now, if that was just the only place where it was and everywhere else described it differently, then we would say, that's craziness. But look at the other verses where he talks about what actually caused there to be a day. The evening first and then the morning. So then if you keep on going in verse 8, it says, and the evening and the morning were the second day. Verse 13 in Genesis 1 says, and the evening and the morning were the third day. Then verse 19 says, and the evening and the morning were the fourth day. Then verse 23 says, and the evening and the morning were the fifth day. You see the pattern that's here? And then if you keep on going, verse 31, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. And so the evening and the morning, from the very beginning, always instituted a day. So the evening and the morning, when the sun went down, the day began again. Sunrise, still the same day. Sunset, we're going into a new day. And so we don't count the days 12 o'clock midnight in the middle of the night. Midnight even came from the Roman Catholic Church or the Romans. They start their days in the middle of the night. And so midnight is exactly what it is. It's the middle of the night, but it's not the beginning of a new day. And so Abib 1 starts Tuesday night when the sun sets. You say, well, where did you get Abib from? Come with me to Exodus. So we're in Genesis right now. So we're just going to make our way to the second book of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus chapter 12. We'll start at verse 1. And we'll probably read verse 2. Exodus chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. And you say, but it doesn't say Abib. No, it does not. But in this same chapter, the Lord goes on and Moses writes about how they're going to keep the Passover, how they're going to get the lamb on the 10th day of the month. And they're going to do all these things as it pertains to Passover during this same month of Abib. So we can conclude from Exodus chapter 12 and some verses on throughout that Passover is in Abib as well. So this month is referring to the same month as Passover is. So now let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 16. Deuteronomy chapter 16 and verse 1. Observe the month of Abib. That's what it says. And keep the Passover unto the Lord thy God. Observe the month Abib and keep the Passover. Remember what we concluded in Exodus chapter 12 is that Passover happens in the same month that is declared as the beginning of months for the Hebrews and for the Israelites. And so then we go to Deuteronomy chapter 16 and it says, observe Abib, because you're going to keep the Passover to the Lord thy God. For in the month of Abib, the Lord thy God brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. Thou shalt therefore sacrifice the Passover unto the Lord thy God of the flock of the herd in the place which the Lord shall choose to place his name there. I'm going to say he brought them out of Egypt. He did bring them out of Egypt. That's in the book of Exodus. And if we go back to the book of Exodus, in Exodus chapter, I think it's chapter 34. And the Lord said unto Moses, hew thee 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and I will write upon these tables. Now, he's broken the other tablets because he came down from the mount with these tablets of stone, and they was down there having a good old time. Orgies and I mean, they was going in. They was naked. They was dancing around this big cow that they made out of the earrings. I mean, that's how spoiled they did the Egyptians. They came out. They had enough earrings to make a golden calf out of it. They was living large on the hog, right? And so in Exodus, we know that the children of Israel were brought out. Now, that was when they were already in the wilderness. But in Exodus, they were commanded to keep the Passover already in Exodus. And that's in Exodus 12. Remember, he said, this month shall be unto you the beginning of the months. And then he says, go ahead and keep the Passover, get your lamb, all of these things. And so remember the tradition, or, you hear about Passover. I remember one of my earliest memories of Passover was not in the church or house of God. It was Rugrats. I was a kid, and I remember watching Rugrats, and they went through the Passover story with the Rugrats. And that's how I learned about the Passover even before I was an adult. I was exposed to it through Nickelodeon. And so remember in Exodus chapter 12, he said he brought them out during this time. So we're proving that they're talking about Passover. So he told them before they were brought out to put the lintel, take the blood and put it on the doorpost, right? And he said, and I'll pass over you. And finally, they left Egypt in Exodus chapter 13, verse 4. Let's go to verse 3. It says, and Moses said unto the people, remember this day in which ye came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For by strength of hand the Lord brought you out from this place. There shall no leavened bread be eaten. This day came ye out in the month Abib. So they came out in the month of Abib. We can prove that through scripture in Exodus chapter 13 and verse 4. And then if you go to Exodus chapter 12, he said, this month shall be unto you the beginning of months. This shall be the first month of the year to you. And then Deuteronomy chapter 16 declares that we should observe the month of Abib, because in the month of Abib, they were brought out. Okay. So this is why we celebrate Abib instead of January 1st, because we do as the scriptures say. Now you say, well, what's the harm? Why should we do all these things? That's under the law. That's under the old covenant. Well, this is my answer to that. I don't have nothing deep to say. My thing is, if it's in the Bible, I can observe it. There's no law against me doing it. But if I'm going to observe the way the world observes, I believe that I would be under more criticism for doing stuff that the world does, and they don't worship God. They don't reverence Jesus as their Lord and Savior. So why should I come up under the customs and the practices of people who reject God in my face and disrespect my Father openly? And so then to add to that answer, because I do have a biblical answer for why we should celebrate these days, because there was a command to do so. And there's never been a command to stop doing it. Even goes far as to say these laws, Passover, Tabernacles, Pentecost, all these other feast days are perpetual covenants. And so these perpetual means it's for all your generations. So these are perpetual covenants in the Bible. And so that's why they're still being done today. Now, are we killing bullocks and doves? No. But Jesus is our Passover. And so that's why we celebrate the Feast of Passover. And so Tuesday night begins at sundown, the Abib first. Okay. And so you say, well, how do you know that? How do you know it's Abib first? Well, because the moon and the sun, they stay the same. And back then they did not have all these fancy calendars. They didn't have Google. They didn't have all of that. So what did they use to keep track of the dates? How do we know that we are in the date that we're in today? Somebody had to start keeping a record. Those records were being kept by tracking the moon and the stars and by keeping record of that. So how do we know that it's 12 o'clock? Well, because that's the highest point that the sun is in the sky. And so you'll get accused, well, why are you using the moon to keep track of holy days? The moon was set in place for times and seasons. That's the way God set that up. So I'm not looking to the moon. The moon isn't telling me that it's time to keep the feast. The scriptures give the commandment, but the scriptures also tell us when, and God gives us help through his creation so that we can keep track of when those things are supposed to be taking place. And so that's why we observe the month of Abib. Observe just means make sure that you keep and look and acknowledge it. Observe it. Why? Because there are significant things that happen around this time in Abib. Our ancestors were delivered with a mighty hand from the Egyptians, from their oppressors, from slavery, from bondage. And so I know that we observe July the 4th as a day to celebrate America's independence. But Abib first is when we remember the independence that that the children of Israel and our ancestors gained from being out of bondage from the Egyptians, the heavy oppression that they faced. And they couldn't really worship God the way that he wanted them to. And so he raised up Moses and he delivered the children of Israel after 400 plus years of bondage. He finally, well, not finally, he heard their cries and he responded to them. And so he delivered them with a mighty hand, in so much that Pharaoh and his army, if you've ever heard the story, ended up being drowned in the Red Sea. And so this is a great thing that we should remember. Now we celebrate the feast days, not just because of that, but we celebrate these feast days because they point back to Christ. Passover points to the sacrifice that the ultimate lamb made for us. And then Passover happens in the same month of Abib on the 14th day. Leviticus chapter 23 lists all of the feast days. Next time we're going to go into those. So stay tuned. I'm over my time, but the feast days, oh, what a treat. We have a blessing and an inheritance that is attached to keeping God's feasts and his laws. We are not keeping his laws to be saved, but because we love him. According to St. John chapter 14 and verse 15, he said, if you love me, keep my commandments.